More than 1,000 years ago, in the deep forests of Eastern Europe, tribes lived who worshipped gods capable of splitting the sky with lightning and shaking the earth with thunder. They told stories of great battles between heavenly forces, of spirits inhabiting every home and every river, of heroes who fought monsters. These tales, passed down from generation to generation, formed one of the world's most mysterious mythologies, the Slavic. But who was Perun? And why did even the bravest warriors fear him? How did Veles, the serpent-like god of the underworld, steal the Thunderer's most precious treasures? What did the sacred groves hide, where priests offered bloody sacrifices to idols with silver heads? And why, in 988, did Prince Vladimir order these mighty gods to be thrown into the waters of the Dnieper? From the creation of the world in primordial chaos to the tragic baptism of Rus, this is the complete story of Slavic mythology, which will change your perception of our ancestors. In the beginning, there was neither earth, nor sky, nor people, only in boundless emptiness that the ancient Slavs called Nav. It was not just darkness, but an active non-existence, a chaos that sought to engulf all that existed. But from this primordial gloom was born Rod, the great creator, whose name meant at once kin, birth, and fate. Rod was unlike the gods of later times. He was conceived by the ancient Slavs as an abstract creative force, as the first impulse that set the universe in motion. Some scholars believe that the image of Rod dates back to the most archaic layers of Indo-European mythology, when our distant ancestors had not yet divided gods into separate personalities. Rod gave birth to Lada, the goddess of love, beauty, and harmony, who became the ancestral mother of all gods. Her name still lives on in the Russian language: lad, harmony, ladit. To get along, ladushki, endearments. All these words preserve the memory of the ancient goddess who brought agreement and beauty into the world. Lada was not only the goddess of love, but also the patroness of family, marriage, and childbirth. Spring songs still contain appeals to her. Oi Lada Lada, sang the girls, invoking the goddess to bless their love. Together with Lada, Rod created Svarog, the celestial blacksmith, whose hammer blows on the anvil, struck sparks of stars. The name Svarog is related to the Sanskrit Svarga, meaning sky, which indicates the antiquity of this image. Svarog did not simply rule the heavens. He was a demiurge, the creator of the material world, a great master who forged the earth from molten metal. Imagine this scene. In the primordial darkness, a divine forge flares, where Svarog, with his mighty hands, shapes the foundations of the world. Each strike of his hammer created new lands, new seas, new mountains. The Slavs saw in every sunrise the reflection of his furnace, in every lightning bolt, a spark from his anvil. Metallurgy was a sacred art, and blacksmiths were considered heirs to divine craftsmanship. But Svarog understood that the world he created needed a protector from the forces of chaos, which constantly tried to return everything to primordial non-existence. And then he gave birth to his son, Perun, the most formidable of all Slavic gods. Perun's birth shook the foundations of the universe. With the infant's first cry, thunder rolled across the sky, and lightning illuminated the world brighter than 1,000 suns. This god was born a warrior. Slavic myths tell that even in his cradle, Perun seized lightning and began to hurl it at the demons of darkness who tried to steal his divine power. He grew into a mighty hero with a silver head and golden mustaches, whose name became synonymous with thunder and divine wrath. Perun rode in a fiery chariot, yoked to winged horses or goats, whose hooves struck sparks from the clouds. In his hands, he held a club made of oak, not just a club, but a sacred weapon, capable of splitting mountains and destroying the most powerful fortresses. His lightning arrows never missed, piercing any cover and striking even invisible enemies. The oak became Perun's sacred tree for a reason. It is the most powerful tree in Slavic forests, capable of living for 1,000 years and withstanding any storm. The main sanctuaries of the Thunderer were built in oak groves, and priests maintained eternal fires before them. When lightning struck an oak, it was considered a special sign. The god marked the place with his presence. But in the depths of the earth, in the roots of that same world tree, another force was born. Veles, the serpent-like god, who would become the eternal adversary of the Thunderer. If Perun embodied order, law, and celestial justice, then Veles represented chaos, change, and the dark magic of the underworld. The ancient Slavs depicted Veles as a huge serpent with iridescent scales, capable of taking any form. He could transform into a bear, the strongest beast of the forest, a bull, a symbol of fertility and wealth, or a human, but something always betrayed his inhuman nature. An overly penetrating gaze, unnatural wisdom, the ability to know what he should not know. Veles became the patron of cattle, the main wealth of the Slavic tribes. But his power was not limited to domestic animals. He ruled all the riches of the earth, gold and silver in subterranean veins, furs of wild animals, amber on the seashores. Merchants particularly revered him, understanding that wealth comes not only from honest labor but also from luck, cunning, and the ability to deceive a rival. Veles's most sinister role was as the conductor of the dead. He lived in the roots of the world tree, where all roads leading to the afterlife converged. His underground palaces were built from dragon bones and adorned with treasures that the dead could not take with them. The souls of the deceased became his subjects, and he decided their fates in the other world. Alongside the great gods, other deities were born, each receiving their sphere of influence in the created world. Dashbog became the embodiment of the benevolent sun, giving warmth and light to all living things. His name literally means giving God, and the Slavs considered him their ancestor, calling themselves Dashbog's grandchildren. When the sun rose over the earth, it was Dashbog beginning his daily journey across the firmament in a golden chariot yoked to white horses. Horse embodied another aspect of the solar deity. The sun in motion, the celestial body completing its cycle through the seasons. His name came from the Iranian Khorshid, meaning sun, reminding us of the ancient contacts of the Slavs with the Scythian tribes of the steppe. If Dashbog was the sun, the giver of good, then Horus was the sun, the keeper of time, determining the change of day and night, the flow of months and years. Strybog became the lord of all winds, from the light summer breeze to the destructive hurricane. The tale of Igor's campaign calls the winds Strybog's grandchildren. And this is not just a poetic metaphor. The ancient Slavs believed that every wind was a messenger of the great god, carrying his will into the human world. Seafarers prayed to Strybog for a favorable wind. Farmers asked him to disperse clouds or, conversely, to bring rain. But the most mysterious figure in the Slavic pantheon was Mokosh, the only great goddess, patroness of women's crafts and human destiny. Her name was associated with spinning and weaving, with the process of transforming chaotic fiber into ordered fabric. Mokosh spun the threads of human lives on her magical spindle, and her will determined whether the thread would be strong or break at the very beginning. Slavic women especially revered Mokosh, understanding that she patronized not only needlework but also all women's secrets: pregnancy, childbirth, raising children, managing a household. In her honor, they left threads at springs, embroidered her symbols on clothing, and sang songs to her while spinning on long winter evenings. Thus, the world of Slavic gods was born. Not a unified family, like the Olympians among the Greeks, but a complex system of forces where each deity controlled its sphere of being. But they were all bound by a common cosmic drama, an eternal struggle between order and chaos, light and darkness, creation and destruction. And a war broke out that determined the fate not only of the gods but also of all mortals on earth. This was not an ordinary battle with a beginning and an end. It was an eternal confrontation between Perun, the lord of the heavens, and Veles, the master of the underworld. Their conflict became the axis around which the entire Slavic cosmos revolved, the source of all natural phenomena, and the driving force of history. The cause of the war was a betrayal of such monstrous force that the Thunderer could not forgive it even after millennia. Veles, cunning and treacherous, stole from Perun what he valued above his own life. According to some versions, it was the sacred cattle, a symbol of celestial wealth and fertility. According to others, it was Perun's wife herself, whom the serpent-like god abducted to his underground chambers. But the most ancient myths speak of an even more terrible theft. Veles stole the Thunderer's children, carrying them off to his serpent's palace, hidden in the roots of the world tree. These children were not ordinary gods, but embodiments of Perun's creative forces, his lightning bolts, his arrows, his rains of blessings, his thunders of victories. By stealing them, Veles deprived the world of divine protection, opening the way for the forces of chaos. Perun's wrath shook the foundations of creation. His fury was so great that clouds obscured the sun for 7 days and 7 nights, and lightning began to strike one after another, attempting to strike the perfidious serpent. But Veles proved more cunning than any opponent. He could take any form, hide behind any barrier, conceal himself in any shelter. When Perun hurled lightning at a tree, thinking Veles was hiding there, the thunderer split the trunk in two, but the enemy had already turned into a stone at the foot of the tree. When divine thunder shattered a rock, the cunning serpent had already turned into a human and disappeared among the people. When lightning struck a person, Veles was already hiding in the form of a cow among the herd, then became a fish in the river, a bird in the sky, a worm in the earth. This endless chase became the basis of the Slavic understanding of natural phenomena. Every thunderstorm was a new battle between eternal enemies. Every lightning strike was Perun's attempt to strike the fleeing Veles. Every rumble of thunder was the cry of the celestial warrior's fury, unable to overcome the elusive shapeshifter. The Slavs learned to read the signs of this cosmic battle. If lightning struck a tree, it meant an evil spirit was hiding there, expelled by celestial fire. If thunder rumbled particularly long, Perun was pursuing Veles across the entire sky. If silence followed the thunderstorm, the gods had concluded a temporary truce. But tomorrow the war would resume with renewed vigor. But this conflict also had another creative side. Without the eternal war of the gods, the world would have plunged into stillness and death. Rain came only when Perun began his hunt for Veles. His clouds poured onto the earth, providing moisture for the plants. The earth became fertile only after lightning strikes. Celestial fire awakened it to life, igniting the spark of growth in seeds. The change of seasons also depended on the outcome of the divine battles. In winter, Veles gained the upper hand, covering the earth with snow and ice, plunging the world into hibernation. In spring, Perun began his offensive. His lightning bolts broke the icy shackles, and his thunders awakened nature from its winter slumber. In summer, the thunderer reached the peak of his strength, but in autumn, there was again a retreat before the onslaught of the underworld god. The Slavs understood the profound meaning of this struggle. The gods fought not out of malice or revenge, but out of cosmic necessity. Their war maintained the balance of the world, ensured the movement of celestial bodies, the passage of time, the very possibility of life. Without Perun, the world would have plunged into darkness and cold. Without Veles, it would have lost the riches of the earth, the wisdom of ancestors, and the connection with the other world. Therefore, both gods received equal honors, though in completely different ways. Idols of Perun were erected in high, open places, on mountains, hills, and in the centers of cities, where they were visible from afar. His statue struck with majesty, wooden pillars several human heights tall, with silver heads and golden mustaches, with eyes of precious stones that sparkled in the sun. Before Perun's idols, eternal fires burned, 8 bonfires for the 8 main wind directions. Priests maintained these fires day and night, understanding that an extinguished bonfire meant the god's wrath and could bring misfortune to the entire tribe. In particularly important cases, fires were lit by lightning. If thunder struck near the sanctuary, it was considered the highest blessing of the thunderer. Warriors swore by Perun's name before battle, touching his idol with their weapons. Princes asked him for victory over enemies, offering horses and bulls as sacrifices, animals worthy of the celestial warrior. Before important battles, grand sacrifices were organized. Priests killed dozens of animals, and their blood flowed at the foot of the divine statue. Veles was revered quite differently. His images were placed not in the center of settlements, but on the borders, by roads, at crossroads, in places where different worlds met. His idols were more modest. Often, they were simply stones with carved signs or unadorned wooden pillars, but they were placed in special locations, where roads diverged, where rivers changed their course, where the forest transitioned into the steppe. Merchants prayed to Veles before long journeys, knowing that trade requires not only honesty but also cunning, the ability to negotiate, and the ability to deceive a dishonest partner. Herders asked him to protect their flocks from predators and diseases, but always remembered the dual nature of this god. He could give wealth, but he could also take life. He could help in trade, but he could also push towards deception. The tale of Igor's campaign preserves an ancient formula for swearing by the names of both gods. If we break our oath, may we be yellow like gold, and cut by our own swords. This was an oath to Veles, the god of gold and death simultaneously. The golden color symbolized the wealth the oath-breaker would receive, and the swords, the death that would overtake him. Such was the justice of the serpent-like god. He gave what he promised, but always demanded an equal price. Other deities also participated in this war, each on their side of the cosmic conflict. Dashbog, the solar deity, naturally supported Perun, illuminating his path across the heavens and giving strength to his lightning. Strybog was a changeable ally. Sometimes he sent winds that dispersed Perun's storm clouds. Sometimes he gathered them into powerful armadas for an attack on the enemy. Mokosh occupied a special position in this war. She spun the destinies of both sides, determining the outcome of each skirmish, the duration of each truce, the moment of the start of a new battle. Her threads bound Perun and Veles into a single system, making them not just enemies but mutually necessary opposites, without whom the world could not exist. In 1848, in the Sprich River, a tributary of the Dniester, peasants found something that turned scholars' understanding of Slavic religion upside down. From the water, they retrieved a stone pillar nearly 3 meters high, covered with mysterious images. This was the Sprich idol, the only surviving monument that can tell us about the Slavic pantheon not from secondary sources, but directly from the pagans themselves. The 4-sided pillar of gray limestone was covered with reliefs arranged in a strict system. 3 tiers, 4 faces. Each detail had a deep symbolic meaning. It was not just a statue, but a 3-dimensional model of the Slavic cosmos, an encyclopedia of ancient mythology carved in stone. The upper tier depicted the world of the gods, 4 figures under a common cap symbolizing the celestial vault. 2 female figures. One held a horn in her hand, a symbol of abundance. The other, a ring, a sign of eternity and marital bonds. 2 male figures, one with a saber and horse, a warrior and protector, the other without a weapon, but with attributes of power. Researchers see in these figures the main Slavic gods, Mokosh with the horn of plenty, Lada with the ring of love, Perun with the saber of thunder, and Dashbog, the peaceful giver of good. The middle tier showed the world of humans. Here were depicted men and women with outstretched arms, perhaps in a ritual dance or prayer pose. Near one of the female figures, a small person, a child, a symbol of the continuation of the lineage, was visible. This tier embodied human life in all its fullness: love, family, labor, worship of the gods. The most mysterious was the lower tier. Here, on 3 faces, the same figure was carved, a 3-faced being on its knees, with raised arms that supported the entire middle world. The 4th face remained empty. This was the world of the dead, the underworld kingdom, where completely different laws reigned. The 3-faced god of the lower world was undoubtedly Veles, in one of his hypostases. The 3 faces allowed him to see the past, present, and future simultaneously, and his raised hands showed that it was he who supported the world of the living. The empty 4th face symbolized the mystery of death, that which cannot be depicted because it lies beyond human understanding. The very fact of creating such an idol speaks of the highest level of development of Slavic theology. This was not primitive idol worship. It was a complex philosophical system capable of creating a cohesive model of the universe. The masters who carved the Sprich idol possessed deep knowledge of the structure of the world, the hierarchy of divine forces, and the connections between different levels of being. The idol was found in the water not by chance. It was most likely hidden in the river in the mid-10th century, when Mongol hordes were devastating Slavic lands. Priests or local residents, understanding that the sacred image could be destroyed by conquerors, decided to preserve it for their descendants by drowning it in the river. Their calculation proved correct. The idol lay in the water for 600 years and awaited its discovery. The place where the idol stood before its submersion in the river has also been found by archaeologists. It is Mount Bagot, the highest hill in the area, offering views for dozens of kilometers in all directions. Here, the remains of an entire cult complex have been discovered. Sanctuaries, priests' dwellings, ritual structures. The Sprich idol was the center of a large religious center, to which pilgrims came from all surrounding lands. But the Sprich idol was not the only monument of this kind. Written sources mention many other statues among various Slavic tribes. The chronicler, Thietmar of Mersburg, described a sanctuary in Rethra, where the idol of the god Redagast stood with a bird on its chest. Adam of Bremen spoke of a temple in Arkona with a 4-faced idol of Svantovit, in whose hands was a horn with honey. The sizes of some idols were particularly impressive. In Arkona, the statue of Svantovit was so large that a person barely reached its waist. In Szczecin, the idol of Triglav had 3 heads and was covered in gold. All these statues perished during Christianization, and only the Sprik idol was accidentally preserved to our days. The technique of making idols was also highly developed. Wooden statues were covered with silver and gold, adorned with precious stones, and dressed in real clothes. Stone sculptures were carved with astonishing skill, achieving not only external resemblance but also conveying the character, mood, and divine essence of each god. Today, the Sprik idol is kept in the Archaeological Museum in Krakow, and its copies stand in museums in many Slavic countries. Every detail of this monument continues to pose questions to researchers. What do the mysterious symbols on the god's clothing mean? Why are precisely these 4 deities depicted in the upper tier? What rituals were performed before the idol? Only new archaeological finds can provide answers to these questions. But it is already clear. The Sprik idol is the key to understanding Slavic mythology, a stone book written in the language of symbols and images. It shows that the religion of our ancestors was not a set of superstitions, but a coherent system of knowledge about the world, man, and the gods. But while the great gods fought in the heavens, and their images were carved in temples, the earth was inhabited by many other creatures, less powerful, but much closer to people's daily lives. Every house, every forest, every river had its own invisible masters with whom the Slavs had to share the world every day, every hour, every minute of their existence. In every Slavic home, from the prince's terem to the peasant's hut, lived a Domovoy. He was not just a spirit, but a full member of the family, older and wiser than any human. The Domovoy was imagined as a small, gray-haired old man, the height of a child, but stooped from great age, covered in gray fur, with a long beard and eyes that glowed in the dark like embers. The Domovoy knew all the family's secrets. He was present at the birth of every child, at every wedding, at every death. He remembered stories that people forgot. He knew the characters of all household members better than they knew themselves. The Domovoy could predict the family's future, seeing signs inaccessible to human sight. A kind Domovoy was a true blessing for the home. He warned of fires, nudged sleeping owners, rattled dishes, knocked on walls until people woke up and discovered the source of danger. He drove away thieves, instilling such panic in them that they dropped their loot and fled. He helped with chores, fed livestock at night, maintained order in the house, and could even tidy up the izbo while the owners slept. The Domovoy especially cared for children. He rocked the cradles of restless infants, protected them from illnesses and the evil eye, played with toddlers when parents were busy working. The Domovoy never scared children. They were, to him, an extension of the family he had protected for centuries. Caring mistresses knew how to appease the Domovoy. On the oven ledge, they left him bread and salt, sometimes milk or porridge. They never forgot to bow to the oven when entering the house, as the invisible keeper lived there. In gratitude, the Domovoy could add grain to the granaries, improve cow's milk yield, and protect the house from illness and misfortune. But an angered Domovoy became a true nightmare for the family. There were many reasons for his wrath: disrespect for ancient customs, profanity in the house, cruel treatment of animals, disruption of family harmony. An evil Domovoy hid necessary things in the most unexpected places, spoiled food by adding something inedible, scared household members with night sounds, clatter, groans, heavy footsteps on the attic. The most terrible revenge of the Domovoy was braiding. He braided the manes and tails of horses into such tight knots that the animals could not eat and began to wither. Untangling these knots was almost impossible. They seemed to grow into the hair. Sometimes, the horse had to be shorn bald, which was considered a great shame for the owner. The most terrible stories told of the evil Domovoy suffocating a sleeping person, pressing down on their chest with all his invisible weight. Waking up, one felt unable to breathe, move, or scream. The Domovoy pressed down, expressing extreme displeasure. To get rid of such punishment, one had to find the reason for the spirit's anger and eliminate it. When a family moved to a new house, the Domovoy was solemnly invited to come with them. The eldest in the family would stand on the threshold of the old house and utter incantations. Domovoy, Domovoy, come with us to a new place. It has become cramped for you to live here, but it will be spacious and free there. Then, bread with salt and embers from the old oven were placed in a bag, so that the Domovoy would have the strength to move and fire for the new dwelling. Another spirit ruled the yard, the Dvorovoy, more severe and demanding than the Domovoy. He watched over all utility buildings and domestic animals. The Dvorovoy was imagined as similar to the Domovoy, but taller and stronger, dressed in a gray caftan belted with a rope. He had very long arms, with which he could reach any corner of the yard, and sharp claws capable of protecting his charges. The Domovoy did not tolerate lazy and negligent owners. If people poorly cared for their livestock, did not repair fences and roofs, and did not maintain cleanliness in the yard, the spirit began to punish them severely. Cows stopped giving milk. Horses began to limp for no apparent reason. Hens stopped laying. Pigs refused to eat and lost weight before their eyes. However, for diligent owners, the Domovoy helped with all his heart. Their animals were healthier and stronger than their neighbors. Cows gave more and richer milk. Horses knew no fatigue even in the heaviest work. Hens laid large eggs almost every day. The Domovoy particularly loved those who spoke kindly to animals, called them by name, and cared for their comfort. To appease the Domovoy, a crust of bread and a pinch of salt were left in the corner of the barn. In some places, it was customary to bury a rooster's egg in the yard or place a bread crust under the threshold. The Domovoy particularly disliked animals of white color. White cats, light horses, white cows. He could comb such animals to death or frighten them so much that they stopped eating. The most dangerous of the domestic spirits was considered the bannock, the invisible master of the bathhouse. After midnight, the bathhouse completely came under his control, and mortals were better off not venturing there. The bannock was imagined as a small but incredibly strong creature, covered in sticky black fur, with long arms capable of reaching any corner of the bathhouse, and fiery eyes that burned in the dark like embers. The bannock could appear in different guises. Sometimes it was a tiny old man with iron teeth, sometimes a huge black shadow covering the entire bench. And at times, he took the guise of a familiar person to deceive his victim. His favorite pastime was frightening people who decided to steam themselves at an improper time. The bannock could scald with boiling water, choke with hot steam, or simply frighten them into a faint. He threw hot stones from the stove, whipped visitors with invisible incandescent brooms, tore off skin with iron claws. Some stories claimed that the bannock could tear off a person's entire skin and hang it to dry under the ceiling. Even during the day, caution had to be exercised with the bannock. Before entering the bathhouse, one had to ask permission from the invisible master. "Bathhouse father, may I steam myself?" If strange sounds, groans, creaks, splashing without visible reason came from the bathhouse, it was better to postpone washing to another day. The bannock was warning that he was busy with his affairs at the moment and did not wish to see people. To appease the bannock, a broom, a piece of soap, and clean water in a ladle were left on the shelf. In some places, bread with salt or a small fish was brought to the bathhouse. The bannock loved order and cleanliness. He did not tolerate profanity in the bathhouse, entering it drunk, or with impure thoughts. The bannock became particularly dangerous for those who tried to tell fortunes in the bathhouse. Girls sometimes came there at midnight to see the face of their betrothed in a mirror or hear a voice from the other world. But the bannock did not like magic being practiced in his domain, and he could punish severely for it, drive one to madness, disfigure, or even kill. Beyond the threshold of the house began a completely different world, wild, uncontrolled by humans, full of danger and wonders. In the forests ruled the Leshy, the greatest of nature spirits, the lord of all beasts and birds, the keeper of ancient secrets. He was a shapeshifter of the highest class, capable of taking any form and deceiving people in the most incredible ways. The Leshy could appear as a giant as tall as the tallest pine, with a head hidden in the clouds and steps that could be heard for several versts. When such a being strode through the forest, trees bent under his feet, animals scattered in terror, and birds fell silent from fear. But the next moment, the same Leshy could become a tiny man hiding in the grass between mushrooms, invisible and elusive. Most often, the Leshy took the form of an ordinary person, a forester, a hunter, a traveler encountered on forest paths. But an attentive eye could always notice something amiss. Green hair the color of moss, no eyebrows or eyelashes, unnaturally long arms, eyes without pupils, or clothes worn inside out, a left boot on the right foot, a caftan buttoned the wrong way, a hat backward. All this betrayed the inhuman nature of the Leshy. The Leshy's favorite pastime was leading people astray. He could make even experienced hunters and loggers circle in one place for hours, preventing them from finding a familiar path. A lost person would see familiar landmarks ahead, but when they approached, It turned out to be a completely different place than they thought. The Leshy could imitate human voices, luring travelers deeper into the forest. A person would hear their name called in a familiar voice. Wife, children, friends, and would follow the call, unaware of the deception. The Leshy would lead him further and further away from the road, into the deepest thicket, where one could get lost forever. The Leshy particularly disliked drunk people. It was believed that alcohol made a person vulnerable to evil spirits, depriving them of natural protection. The Leshy could lead a drunk person so deep into the forest that they would become his eternal captive, a wanderer who would never find their way home. Such people turned into forest savages, forgot human speech, lived on berries and roots, and eventually became part of the forest world themselves. But the Leshy was not only a mischief maker, he could also help if approached correctly. Hunters knew special incantations that allowed them to negotiate with the forest master. Forest king, give me a path and game, they would say, leaving a piece of bread with salt on a stump. If the Leshy was in a good mood, he could point out a place rich in game or even lead the hunter directly to the animal. There were also ways to protect oneself from the forest delusion. If a person realized they were lost due to the Leshy's fault, they had to turn their clothes inside out, the left sleeve to the right hand, the right to the left, and change their footwear. Swearing also helped. The Leshy, despite his antiquity, was simple at heart and could be offended by rudeness and leave a person alone. The most effective method was to utter a special incantation. I walked, I found, I lost, I found the way, and spit 3 times over the left shoulder. After that, the Leshy's charms would dissipate, and the person could find the right path. Some carried consecrated bread with them. If the Leshy led someone into the thicket, they had to place the bread on a stump and ask to be shown the way home. In the waters of rivers and lakes ruled an equally mighty spirit, the Vodyanoy. This old man with green hair and a beard of river silt was feared by all who lived by the water. He resided in the deepest pools, in underwater palaces built from river pearls, fish bones, and the remains of sunken ships. The Vodyanoy was imagined as a pot-bellied old man with a huge head covered in algae. His large green eyes were like ponds reflecting the sky. His long arms had webs between his fingers, and instead of legs, he had a powerful fishtail. The Vodyanoy dressed in a green kaftan made of river algae, belted with sedge, and wore a hat of yellow water lilies on his head. In his hands, the Vodyanoy always held a club made of alder, a tree that likes to grow near water. With this club, he stunned fish for his table, and he could strike disobedient people so hard that they drowned like stones. His underwater mill worked without wind, grinding not grain, but human souls, those whom the Vodyanoy had dragged into his domain. Millers, whose mills stood on rivers, knew about the Vodyanoy firsthand. He could help with work. At night, his mill ground grain with incredible speed. But for this, he demanded a special price. Some millers made agreements with the Vodyanoy. He helped them get rich, and they gave him part of their soul, or promised to drown a certain number of people. The Vodyanoy drowned people not out of malice, but by his nature, he needed souls for his underwater kingdom. It was especially dangerous to swim at inappropriate times, after sunset, during a full moon, on church holidays. One should not enter the water without a cross on their neck, drunk, with bad thoughts or intentions. But the Vodyanoy could also save a person if asked correctly. Fishermen, before the start of the season, threw bread with salt into the water, saying, "Grandfather Vodyanoy, accept bread and salt, give us fish." If the Vodyanoy accepted the offering favorably, fishermen could count on a rich catch and safe voyages. The Vodyanoy warned of floods by raising the water level in the river in advance. He could point fishermen to particularly fish-rich spots or even drive fish directly into their nets. Sometimes, the Vodyanoy saved drowning children, especially if they had not yet sinned or if their parents were pious people. The Vodyanoy had a special weakness. He loved beautiful girls and young women. Sometimes he abducted them, dragging them to his underwater palace, where they became his wives. But such marriages were rarely happy. Earthly women longed for sunlight and air, and the Vodyanoy could not give them true human warmth. The most mysterious water spirits were the Rusalki, and they were fundamentally different from the sea nymphs of Western legends. In the Slavic tradition, Rusalki were the souls of drowned women, unbaptized infants, girls who died of unhappy love, women cursed by their own parents for sins or disobedience. Rusalki were imagined as beautiful young women with long green hair, but their beauty was deceptive and deathly. They had pale, cold skin like river water, empty eyes without souls, in which only stars and the moon were reflected. Instead of legs, many Rusalki had fishtails, although some could take on a completely human form. Rusalki lived in deep pools, in backwaters overgrown with reeds, in underwater grottos. But unlike the Vodyanoy, who rarely left his domain, Rusalki could come ashore. They particularly loved to sway on the branches of weeping willows hanging over the water, comb their long hair in the moonlight, and dance in ring dances in riverside clearings. Rusalki lured men with singing and dancing. Their voices were beautiful, but they carried an inhuman sorrow, a call to death, a temptation of oblivion. Hearing the singing of a Rusalka, a man lost his will, walked to the water as if enchanted, and the Rusalki dragged him underwater, where they tickled him to death with their cold fingers or choked him in embraces stronger than iron chains. But Rusalki became especially active during the Rusalka week, the 7 days after Trinity, when the boundary between the world of the living and the dead thinned to the limit. During these days, they left the watery depths and wandered through forests, fields, and gardens, approaching human dwellings. This was the most dangerous time of year for travel and work by the water. Women during Rusalka week did not wash clothes in rivers, did not draw water after sunset, and did not let children near the water unsupervised. Bunches of wormwood and nettles were hung around houses. Rusalki were afraid of these bitter herbs, which symbolized earthly life and human tears. Men were advised to avoid solitary walks by the river and not to listen to songs coming from the thickets. At the end of Rusalka week, a special ritual was held, the farewell to the Rusalki. Village women went to the river with wreaths of wormwood, sang special songs, inviting the dead souls to return to their watery domains. Rusalki, Rusalki, go home. Your time is past. Our time has come. Wreaths were thrown into the water, and it was believed that the Rusalki swam away with them until the next year. Even fields and meadows had their invisible keepers. The Polevik, a spirit black from earth and field dust, worked when people slept, guarding the ripening harvest. He was imagined as a small man, covered in earth and grass, so that he was almost impossible to notice among the ears of grain. The Polevik had unusually long arms with which he could reach any plant in his field, and sharp teeth with which he bit through weed roots. The Polevik protected crops from pests, drove birds away from ripening ears, and ensured that grains grew and developed properly. He knew the secrets of farming better than any human, understood which plants to plant next to each other, when to water, when to fertilize, when to harvest. But the Polevik could also severely punish negligent farmers. If a peasant was lazy in cultivating the land, did not weed, did not care for the crops, the spirit sent all sorts of troubles to his fields. Locusts that ate young shoots, aphids that sucked the sap from plants, mice that gnawed at roots and stole grain. The Polevik was especially angry at those who violated the ancient rules of field work. One should not sleep in the field at noon, when the spirit rested after night work. He could crush a sleeper with his invisible weight. One should not harvest with a sickle after sunset. This time belonged to the Polevik, and he could entangle a person in the ears of grain so that they suffocated. The Mezevik strictly monitored the boundaries of land plots. This spirit was imagined as a gray-haired old man in white robes, with a long staff in his hands, with which he measured and marked the boundaries. The Mezevik knew every boundary stone, every furrow, every stone marking the border between neighboring plots. Those who arbitrarily moved boundary markers, expanding their land at the expense of their neighbors, faced the Mezevik's severe revenge. He could inflict an incurable disease on the thief, make his fields infertile for many years, and drive his family to poverty and shame. The Mezevik was a guardian of justice, and did not forgive even the smallest deceptions. All these spirits constituted a complex hierarchy of the invisible world, which existed parallel to the human world but constantly intersected with it. They demanded respect, adherence to ancient rules, understanding of their nature and needs. Unlike the distant gods who governed cosmic forces, domestic and natural spirits lived alongside people, influencing every aspect of their daily lives. Knowledge of this invisible world was vital for our ancestors. A person who did not know how to get along with the Domovoy risked their family's health. One who did not understand the laws of the Leshy could get lost in their native forest. One who did not know the habits of the Vodyanoy could drown in a familiar river. Slavic mythology taught people to live in harmony with all inhabitants of the world, visible and invisible, friendly and hostile, understandable and mysterious. The life of the ancient Slavs was governed by a rhythm older and more powerful than the will of princes, the desires of people, or earthly plans. This rhythm was set by the gods themselves, through the movement of the sun across the sky, the changing seasons, the eternal struggle of light with darkness. Every turn of the celestial wheel required special rites, special sacrifices, special reverence for the forces that governed the destinies of the world. The winter solstice was a time of greatest danger for the entire universe. On the longest night of the year, the forces of darkness reached the peak of their power, and there was a real threat that the sun would never return to people. The 12 days from the solstice to the first new moon were considered a critical period, when the world balanced between existence and a return to primordial chaos. Sviatki began with Kolyadovany, a ritual of cosmic significance, which was to save the world from eternal darkness. This was not just entertainment or a way to get treats. Young people, wearing masks of animals and spirits, symbolically transformed into divine forces capable of influencing the course of creation. Koleda, Koleda, open the gates, give me blyny, give me pie, give me oats, give me bread, sang the Kolyadovshchiki, but their songs were incantations, helping the sun find the strength to be reborn. Every treat they received became a sacrifice to the gods of light. Every good wish amplified the magic of the return of warmth and life. To refuse the Kolyadovshchiki meant not just stinginess, it was equivalent to refusing to help the gods in their struggle against darkness. Such a family risked incurring a curse. Crop failure, livestock diseases, death of children, fires, and other misfortunes. Therefore, even the poorest peasants found something for the Kolyadovshchiki, understanding that it was a matter of the survival of the entire world. The masks worn by the participants of Kolyadovany had special significance. They were not just ways to change appearance, but magical tools of transformation. Putting on a bear mask, a person temporarily became the embodiment of bear strength. A goat mask gave the fertile power of that animal. A mask of a grandfather or grandmother transformed one into a representative of the world of ancestors. The most important were the masks of the dead. They were worn so that deceased relatives could participate in saving the world through the living. On Sviatki days, the boundary between the world of the living and the dead disappeared, and the souls of ancestors returned to their ancestral homes. Baths were heated for them, their favorite food was prepared, and places were left for them at the festive table. Ancestors came not only for treats but also to check if their descendants lived worthily. They could bless obedient children who honored the memory of the lineage but severely punish those who forgot ancient traditions. Therefore, during Sviatki days, ancient customs were especially strictly observed. Families did not quarrel, and work was not done without extreme necessity. Fortune-telling on Sviatki days was not entertainment. These were attempts to communicate with otherworldly forces at a time when such communication became possible. Girls poured wax into water, observing the shapes that formed. Animals predicted wealth. Flowers, love and marriage. Crosses, illness or death. They looked into mirrors by candlelight, hoping to see the face of their betrothed or receive a sign about the future. Fortune-telling in the bathhouse was especially dangerous and effective. The bravest girl went there alone at midnight, backward, undressed, and put her hand through the window of the steam room. Whatever her hand grasped would tell about her future husband. A furry hand meant a rich husband, smooth, a poor one, cold, early widowhood, hot, a drunkard. But many feared such fortune-telling, knowing that instead of predicting their destiny, they could be grabbed by the bannock or another evil spirit. Maslenitsa symbolized the beginning of a great cosmic battle between spring and winter. It was not a peaceful transition of seasons, but a real war, in which every person became a warrior of light. Blyny, baked throughout Maslenitsa week, were not just traditional food, but magical symbols of the sun, a weapon in the fight against cold and darkness. Each day of Maslenitsa had its own sacred meaning. Monday, greeting. On this day, a straw effigy of Maslenitsa was made and solemnly paraded through the village, showing it to all the inhabitants. Tuesday, courting. Mass festivities began, sledding down hills, snowball fights. Wednesday, sweet tooth. Sons-in-law visited their mothers-in-law for blyny, strengthening family ties. Thursday, merriment. This was a day of the wildest entertainment, fistfights, horse races, taking snow fortresses. Friday, mothers-in-law's evening. Now mothers-in-law went to their sons, In-law, completing the circle of family visits. Saturday, sisters, in-laws gatherings. Daughters, in-law received their sisters, in-law, demonstrating their culinary skills. But the culmination of Maslenitsa was Sunday, Forgiveness Day, when the ritualistic killing of winter occurred. A straw doll in women's clothing was solemnly tried, accused of all the troubles of the past year. Harsh frosts that ruined livestock, illnesses that decimated people, crop failures that brought hunger to families. After the trial, the effigy was burned on a huge bonfire outside the village, and this fire was supposed to transfer accumulated solar power to the earth. People jumped over the bonfire, cleansing themselves of the sins and illnesses of the past year. The ashes from the burned Maslenitsa were scattered over the fields to make the earth fertile. Leftover bliny were buried in the ground or fed to livestock, transferring the sun's power to animals and plants. Spring festivals celebrated the awakening not only of nature but also of human passions. The spring equinox was celebrated by baking javaronki, pastries in the shape of birds, symbolizing the return of migratory birds and the final victory of spring over winter. Children scattered these pastries over the field, saying, "Javaronki, Javaronochki, bring us keys, unlock the earth, lock winter." On this day, work in the fields began for the first time of the year, preparing for sowing. But first, the earth had to be awakened from its winter sleep. Women went barefoot onto the first thaws and stomped their feet, saying, "Mother Earth, wake up, cover yourself with green grass." Men carried seeds to the fields and consecrated them with holy water or honey, asking the earth for a bountiful harvest. Krasnaya Gorka, the first Sunday after Easter, was a holiday of youth, love, and continuation of the lineage. On this day, weddings were preferably held, understanding that marriages concluded on Krasnaya Gorka would be especially strong and happy. Young people gathered on hills and slopes, hence the name of the holiday, for round dances, songs, games, and meetings. On Krasnaya Gorka, girls led round dances under the open sky for the first time after a long winter. They wore their best outfits, decorated with protective symbols, embroidery, braided wreaths of the first spring flowers, and sang songs about love and marriage. Young men organized competitions of strength, agility, and generosity, trying to impress the brides. But the culmination of the entire annual cycle was the holiday of Ivan Kupala, the summer solstice, when the sun reached the peak of its power, and all magical forces of the earth became activated along with it. It was a celebration of fire, water, and plant magic, a time when nature itself revealed its deepest secrets to the initiated. On the eve of Kupala night, healers and wise women went into the forests and fields to gather medicinal herbs. At this time, plants possessed maximum healing power, capable of curing any illness and protecting against any misfortune. Herbs gathered before sunrise, when dew still lay on them, were especially valued. This dew was also collected, considered a universal remedy. Girls braided wreaths of 12 different herbs, each having its own magical significance. Ivan tea for Love Street, John's wort for protection from evil forces, wormwood for expelling illnesses, fern for wealth, mint for happiness in the home. These wreaths were then used for divination about marriage, floated down the river, and their path observed. The main event of Kupala night was the sacred bonfires, huge columns of flame that were lit on every hill. These fires were supposed to help the sun in its struggle against the encroaching darkness, as after the summer solstice, the days begin to shorten. The bonfires were lit with living fire, by rubbing wood against wood, without using ordinary coals or flint. Lovers jumped over the Kupala bonfires in pairs, holding hands. If they did not unclasp their hands during the jump, they were promised a happy and strong marriage. If their hands separated, the relationship would not last long. Fire purified from illness and the evil eye. So livestock were driven through the bonfires, sick children were fumigated, and old clothes and unnecessary items were burned. In some places, burning wheels were rolled down the hills, an ancient symbol of the sun in its annual movement. The further the flaming wheel rolled, the better the harvest would be, the happier the year would be for the entire community. These wheels were made of straw, wrapped in tow, set on fire, and rolled down the highest hills towards the river. Girls on Kupala night went into the forest to search for the mythical fern flower. Everyone knew that ferns never bloomed, but legends claimed that on this magical night, it blossomed for a single moment with a bright red color. Whoever managed to see and pick this flower would gain the ability to understand the language of all animals, would be able to find hidden treasures, and would become invisible to enemies. But the fern flower was guarded by all the forest spirits. It was told that seekers saw the earth open beneath their feet. Huge serpents crawl out from under the roots. Trees come to life and grab people with their branches. Most never found the coveted flower, and some returned from the forest insane or disappeared forever. Autumn festivals were a time of thanksgiving to the gods and preparation for the harsh winter. The harvest festival was celebrated not just with feasts and revelry, but with complex rituals of gratitude. The first sheaf was decorated with bright ribbons and solemnly carried into the house, where it occupied an honorable place in the red corner next to icons or images of gods. From the grain of the first sheaf, a special bread was baked, which was solemnly shared among all members of the community. This was a kind of communion with the divine power of the earth, a ritualistic consumption of the flesh of the mother goddess, who gave her fruits to people. Each piece of such bread carried a blessing for the entire coming year. All these festivals required sacrifices, payment to the gods for their favor. Sacrifices varied, from simple offerings of bread and honey to bloody rituals with the killing of animals, and in critical situations, humans. Archaeologists find numerous testimonies of such rites: hearths with burnt animal bones, ritual pits with remnants of feasts, burials of sacrificed people and animals near sanctuaries. Bulls and horses, animals worthy of the celestial warrior, were sacrificed to Perun. Gold, silver, expensive furs, the riches he ruled, were sacrificed to Veles. Threads, fabrics, women's jewelry were offered to Mokosh. Each deity received what corresponded to its nature and sphere of influence. In particularly critical moments, during droughts, epidemics, or military defeats, human sacrifices might be required. Usually, prisoners of war or criminals were chosen for this, but sometimes the lot could fall on any member of the community. Such sacrifices were not considered cruelty, but a necessity in a world where gods truly influenced human destinies. These rituals were not an act of barbarism. They were part of a complex religious system that maintained the connection between people and higher powers. Each sacrifice strengthened the covenant with the gods. Each rite renewed the cosmic order. Each festival helped the world pass through another critical period and survive until the next turn of time. While princes decided political destinies, those who were a living link between people and gods, the Volkovs, served in forest sanctuaries and city temples. These priests of the pagan gods were not just cult servants, but keepers of thousand-year-old wisdom, masters of magic, predictors of the future, and healers of souls. The word Volkiv comes from an ancient root meaning to speak, to prophesy. The Volkers were those who spoke on behalf of the gods, conveyed their will to people, interpreted signs, and predicted destinies. They knew the secret names of all spirits, could charm illnesses, could summon rain or drought, predict the outcomes of battles and harvests. Unlike Christian priests who served one god, the Volkvers worshipped the entire pantheon of Slavic deities. Each specialized in serving certain gods. Some were priests of Perun and conducted military rituals. Others served Veles and dealt with trade matters. Still others worshipped Mokosh and helped women in childbirth and domestic concerns. The preparation of a Volkov lasted for decades. From childhood, future priests studied sacred songs, memorized the genealogies of the gods, and mastered the art of interpreting dreams and natural signs. They had to know all the holidays and rites, know how to properly offer sacrifices, understand the language of birds and animals, and distinguish between good and evil spirits. The Volkvers enjoyed enormous authority among the people. People went to them for advice not only in religious matters but also in everyday affairs: when to sow grain, when to hold a wedding, how to treat illnesses, how to defend against enemies. The word of a Volkov often meant more than a prince's order, especially in matters concerning ancient traditions. But with the arrival of Christianity, the status of the Volkovs changed drastically. The new faith declared them servants of the devil, and their knowledge, harmful superstition. Persecutions began, which forced many priests to flee into the forests, hide in remote villages, and pass on knowledge only to the most loyal students. By the 10th century, the world had changed so much that the ancient gods could no longer provide answers to the new challenges of the time. The young state of Rus needed allies, trading partners, diplomatic ties, and pagan deities only connected it to the forests and fields of Eastern Europe. Prince Vladimir Sviatoslavich faced a historical choice that would determine the fate of millions of people for millennia to come. Vladimir was not a religious fanatic. He was a calculating politician who perfectly understood that the choice of faith meant the choice of the future for the entire state. In those times, religion was not a personal matter but a state ideology that determined alliances and hostilities, trade routes and cultural ties. Ambassadors from various peoples arrived one after another at his court in Kiev. Each offered their religion and promised great benefits from a spiritual union. The Volga Bulgars came with an offer to adopt Islam, a militant faith, uniting vast territories from Spain to Central Asia. Their religion provided clear rules of life, strict discipline, and unity of believers. Western Christians spoke of Catholicism, the religion of the mighty Roman Empire, which could open the doors of all of Europe to Rus. The Pope promised support in wars, trade privileges, access to Western technologies and knowledge. The Khazars offered Judaism, the ancient faith of a chosen people, which could provide access to trade networks stretching across the entire world at that time. And finally, the Byzantine Greeks came with stories about orthodoxy, a faith that, according to them, combined beauty and truth, the power of a great empire, and deep spirituality. The tale of bygone years preserves the legend of how each delegation criticized competitors and extolled its religion. Muslims spoke of heavenly pleasures, but forbade wine and pork. Catholics promised power but demanded obedience to the Pope. Jews offered ancient wisdom but had no land of their own. When a Byzantine philosopher showed the prince an icon of the Last Judgment, explaining that the righteous would go to paradise and sinners to hell, Vladimir exclaimed, "Good for those on the right, but woe to those on the left." This phrase, possibly legendary, accurately conveys the prince's pragmatic approach to religious matters. However, the decisive role was played not by religious, but by political and economic considerations. Byzantium was the wealthiest and most powerful empire of that time. Its capital, Constantinople, was the largest center of world trade and culture. An alliance with it opened unprecedented opportunities for the young Slavic state, access to the Silk Road, to Mediterranean trade, to the achievements of ancient civilization. When Emperor Basil II asked for military assistance against the rebel Vardafocus, Vladimir agreed to help, but made a condition that shocked the entire Byzantine court. He demanded Princess Anna, the emperor's sister, as his wife. This marriage became a real sensation. Never before had a Porphyrogenita, a daughter or sister of the emperor, married a barbarian prince. Byzantine aristocracy was furious. To give the imperial sister to a Scythian, as they called the Slavs, seemed an unthinkable humiliation. But political necessity proved stronger than prejudice. The rebellion of Vardafocus threatened the very existence of the empire, and the Russian retinue was the only force capable of suppressing it. The emperor agreed to the marriage, but with one condition. Vladimir must accept Christianity and baptize his people. In 988, the prince was baptized in Chersonesus, an ancient Greek city in Crimea, but personal baptism was not enough. The entire vast Ruses had to be baptized. And here began a real tragedy for the ancient gods. Before completely breaking with the faith of his ancestors, Vladimir attempted to carry out a religious reform that could unite the scattered tribal cults into a single system. On a hill in Kiev, next to the prince's palace, he erected 6 idols from different tribal traditions. Perun with a silver head and golden mustaches, the solar gods Horus and Dashbog, the lord of winds Strybog, the enigmatic Simargal, and the soul goddess Mokosh. This was a grand attempt to create a state religion from pagan elements. Perun was placed at the head of the pantheon as the patron of the prince and his retinue. The other gods were to represent the interests of various social groups. Dashbog, the farmers; Strybog, the seafarers and merchants; Mokosh, the women and artisans. Eternal fires burned before the idols. Priests offered bloody sacrifices, including human ones. Chronicles preserve the story of how the lot fell on a Varangian Christian and his son. When the father refused to give up his son for sacrifice, an enraged crowd destroyed their house and killed both. This was one of the last human sacrifices in the history of Rus, but the experiment failed for several reasons. Different Slavic tribes did not want to worship each other's gods. The Novgorodians did not understand why they should worship the solar Horus, and the southern tribes saw no point in the cult of the northern Strybog. Priests conflicted among themselves, arguing about which god was greater and which rituals were more correct. Most importantly, reformed paganism did not solve Rus's international problems. Neighboring states still viewed it as a barbaric periphery, not an equal partner. Trade privileges, military alliances, cultural exchange, all this remained inaccessible to a pagan power in a world dominated by monotheistic religions. Then Vladimir made a fateful decision for the old gods. The ancient faith had to die so that a new one could be born and give Rus a place among the great powers of the world. What did the wooden Perun feel when Kiev Drazeniki tied him with ropes and dragged him to the Dnieper? For 1,000 years, this formidable defender had guarded the Slavic lands from enemies and evil spirits. His lightning shattered enemy troops. His thunder frightened evil spirits. And now he was turning into a simple log, ruthlessly dragged by shouts. Under the cries of the perishing people, 12 men walked alongside the idol, beating it with sticks on the prince's orders. After all, it was not enough to simply throw the god into the water. It was necessary to show everyone that he had no strength to protect even himself. Perun's silver head and golden mustaches were torn off. His wooden arms were broken, until the current of the Dnieper carried away the remains of the former lord of the heavens beyond the rapids, where they disappeared into the watery abyss. The Kievans were baptized relatively peacefully. In the capital, there was strong princely power, and many boyars already secretly practiced Christianity, understanding the political benefits of the new faith. Moreover, the townspeople were accustomed to changes and more easily parted with old traditions for new opportunities. But when Vladimir's uncle Dobrynya arrived in Novgorod with the same mission, he was met with real armed resistance. The Novgorodians were more conservative than the Kievans, clinging more firmly to ancient customs. They shouted, "Better we die than give our gods to desecration." And they took up arms. A real civil war began. The city was divided in half. One part of the inhabitants supported Christianization. The other was ready to die for the old gods. Blood flowed in the streets. Houses burned, people died. The priests of Perun fought particularly fiercely. They knew that the new faith would leave them no place in the world. Tysitsky Putyata, Dobrynya's assistant, acted with an iron hand. He arrested the leaders of the resistance, destroyed the sacred grove of Perun in the Perun tract, and forced the townspeople to go to the Volkhov for mass baptism by force. In folk memory, these events remained in the saying, Putyata baptizes with a sword, and Dobrynya with fire. The idol of Perun in Novgorod was also thrown into the river, but according to legend, it managed to perform one last miracle. Floating down the Volkhov, the wooden statue threw its club onto the great bridge and shouted to the Novgorodians, "By this I remember you. That is, by this I will remember you." This was the last voice of the dying god, his farewell message to the people who had worshipped him for centuries. Archaeologists have found traces of this religious catastrophe throughout Rus. In the Perun tract near Novgorod, they excavated the remains of a pagan sanctuary, a circular platform 21 meters in diameter, surrounded by a moat in the shape of an 8-petaled flower. In the center stood a wooden pillar several human heights tall, the throne of an invisible god, and sacred fires burned around the edges. After Christianization, the sanctuary was not simply abandoned, it was systematically destroyed. The idol was chopped into pieces, the fires were doused with water, the sacred platform was covered with earth and debris, and a Christian church of the Nativity of the Virgin Mary was built on top, as if sealing the place of power with the new faith. Similar finds are made by archaeologists throughout the territory of ancient Russes. In Kiev, Pskov, Smolensk, Polotsk, remains of destroyed pagan sanctuaries are found everywhere, over which Christian churches were built. This was not a coincidence, but a deliberate policy. The new religion was meant to literally rise on the bones of the old, but throughout Roses, resistance continued for a long time, and fiercely. In remote forests and distant villages, people continued to worship the old gods, offer sacrifices to them, and observe ancient rites. The church encountered a phenomenon that historians called dual belief. Officially, people were Christians, but in their souls, they remained pagans. The Volkovs, pagan priests, who did not intend to surrender without a fight, posed a particular danger to the new faith. They went into the forests, created secret sanctuaries, and continued to train disciples in ancient knowledge. Moreover, they openly called on the people to return to the faith of their ancestors, asserting that the Christian God was weak and could not protect Rus from misfortunes. In the 10th century, Several large uprisings occurred under the leadership of the Volkoves. In 1024, in Suzdal, a Volkov announced that he knew the true cause of the crop failure. Christian priests, with their prayers, had angered the ancient gods of the earth, and they refused to yield their fruits. He proposed to return to the old rites and offer proper sacrifices. The people believed the Volkov. As the crop failure was truly terrible, people were dying of hunger. The uprising engulfed the entire Suzdal land. Christian priests were expelled from the villages. Churches were turned into pagan temples, and ancient rituals were revived. Only the arrival of the prince's retinue suppressed the rebellion. Even more dramatic events occurred in 1071 inches Belozersk. A local Volkva accused several noblewomen of crop failure, claiming that they were ruining the weather and destroying the crops with their witchcraft. An enraged crowd killed the accused, and the Volkvar declared himself the new ruler of the city. These rebellions were brutally suppressed by princely power. Jan Vishetik, Prince Gleb's voivode, personally executed 2 Volkovs in Belozersk. But it was impossible to completely eradicate pagan traditions. They went underground, hid under the guise of Christian rites, and were preserved in fairy tales, songs, and folk beliefs. The Volkvars continued to act secretly for several more centuries. They healed people with herbs and incantations, predicted the future, and helped solve everyday problems. People went to them when official medicine was powerless, when advice was needed on matters that the church did not resolve. Gradually, the Volkvars transformed into healers, wise men, sorcerers, people who preserved fragments of ancient knowledge but lost contact with the great gods. They still knew the properties of herbs, could charm illnesses, and understood the language of nature. But these were already fragments of a great tradition, not the tradition itself. Christianity triumphed officially, but the ancient gods did not disappear without a trace. They proved surprisingly tenacious, capable of adaptation and disguise. The church was forced to compromise, understanding that the people's faith could not be changed by decrees and coercion alone. Thus began the amazing story of the transformation of pagan gods into Christian saints. Perun was replaced by the prophet Elijah, an Old Testament hero who, like the thunderer, rode across the sky in a fiery chariot and hurled lightning arrows at evil spirits. The people easily accepted this substitution. Prophet Elijah rides across the sky in a fiery chariot. They sang in the villages, forgetting that they once sang the same about Perun. The day of Street Elijah, July 20th Old Style, became the new holiday of the thunderer. On Elijah's day, as in ancient times, it was forbidden to work in the fields for fear of celestial fire. Peasants said, "On Elijah, thunder will kill you if you work," repeating the ancient prohibition of field work on Perun's day. If thunder rumbled on Elijah's day, it meant the prophet was pursuing evil spirits, just as Perun once hunted Veles. Veles was replaced by Saint Blaise of Sebaste, an early Christian martyr, whom the church declared the patron saint of domestic animals. Cattle breeders did not even notice the substitution. They continued to pray for the health of their animals, only now they turned to Saint Blaise. His day, February 11th, was celebrated with the same rituals as the ancient festivals of Veles, and old sayings remained almost unchanged. Vlas's power breaks the horn from winter, they said on the day of remembrance of the saint, imbuing these words with the memory of Veles's ancient power, capable of breaking the winter cold. On Saint Blaise's day, cows received the best hay, and shepherds held prayers for the health of their herds. Mokosh transformed into Saint Paraskeva Friday, the patroness of trade and women's work. Her chapels and churches were built in the same places where the goddess's idols once stood. Women continued to offer her threads, fabrics, and ask for easy childbirth and family happiness. Paraskeva Friday received all the functions of the ancient goddess of fate. On Friday, the day of Saint Paraskeva, women did not spin or weave, just as they once did not work on Mokosh's day. They said, "Paraskeva does not like it when women work on her day," and these words sounded exactly like the ancient prohibitions for honoring the goddess of spinning. Pagan festivals also received Christian cover, retaining their pagan content. Maslenitsa officially became preparation for Great Lent, but people continued to bake sunbliny and burn the effigy of winter. The church could not prohibit these rituals. They were too deeply ingrained in the popular consciousness. Ivan Kupala turned into the nativity of John the Baptist, but Kupala bonfires were still lit at the summer solstice, and girls floated wreaths on the water, divining about grooms. jumping over fire, searching for the fern flower, night dances. All this continued under the guise of a Christian holiday. Sviatki became the period between Christmas and Epiphany, but mummers continued to visit homes in masks of animals and spirits. Kolyadki acquired Christian motifs. Now they sang about the birth of Christ. But the magical structure of the songs remained the same. Refusing the Kolyadovschiki was still considered dangerous for the family's well-being. Domovoy, Leshy, Vodyanoy, and Rusalki became evil spirits in the eyes of the official church, but people continued to interact with them. Bread was still left for the Domovoy on the oven, the forest was still bowed to upon entering it, and a coin was thrown to the Vodyanoy before fishing. Christian crosses and prayers became new ways to protect oneself from hostile spirits, but the spirits themselves did not disappear anywhere. Moreover, some pagan characters received new roles in Christian demonology. Veles, the ancient god of wealth and wisdom, turned into the devil, horned and shaggy, as was the patron of cattle. Rusalki became servants of Satan, luring sinners to hell. Leshy and Vodyanoy turned into demons who had to be exorcised with a cross and holy water. But even after becoming evil spirits, the ancient spirits retained many of their original functions. The Domovoy still guarded the house, even if he was now considered a demon. The Leshy was still the master of the forest, although the church called him the devil. The Vodyanoy continued to rule rivers and lakes, despite his new status as an impure spirit. The true second life of old gods and spirits was found in folk tales, which became the last refuge of expelled mythology. Here, under the guise of children's stories, the oldest myths about the creation of the world, the battles of gods, journeys to other worlds, and magical transformations were preserved. Baba Yaga in Russian fairy tales is not just an evil old woman, but a direct descendant of the ancient goddess of death, a priestess of passage between worlds. Her hut on chicken legs stands on the border between the realm of the living and the dead, and she herself can be kind or evil, depending on the intentions of the visitor. When a fairy tale hero addresses Baba Yaga with respect, calls her grandmother, and asks for help, she becomes a wise advisor, gives magical items, and points the way. But if the hero behaves rudely, or comes with ill intentions, Yaga turns into a man-eater, trying to roast the uninvited guest in the oven. Koshchei the Deathless embodied the memory of the rulers of the underworld, the ancient gods of death and wealth. His death, hidden at the tip of a needle in an egg, in a duck, in a hare, in a chest. This is an echo of the myth of the world tree, on whose branches hang the lives of all living beings. The chest symbolizes the earth, the hare, the transience of life, the duck, the element of water, the egg, the origin of life, and the needle, the thin thread connecting the soul to the body. Zmai Gorinich with 3 heads became a fairy tale embodiment of ancient dragons, guardians of treasures. His 3 heads symbolize the ability to see the past, present, and future simultaneously, or the 3 kingdoms of the universe, celestial, earthly, and underground. He lives in caves, guards treasures, can fly, and breathe fire. All these are features of ancient chthonic deities. Ivan Tsarevich, who travels beyond the 39 lands to the 30th kingdom, repeats the journey of ancient hero shamans who traveled to other worlds for knowledge and magical items. His helpers, the Grey Wolf, Sivka Burka, the Firebird, are patron spirits, animal totems that, in pagan times, accompanied chosen people on their mystical wanderings. The Firebird preserved the features of a solar deity. Its feathers glow in the dark. It lives in a golden palace. Its singing heals the sick. Only a hero with a pure heart can catch it, and one of its feathers gives its owner magical power. In these details, the attributes of ancient solar gods are recognizable. Vasilisa the Wise embodied the image of ancient priestesses, knowledgeable women who possessed secret knowledge. She can transform into a frog, a symbol of earthly wisdom, a swan, a connection to celestial forces, a sorceress capable of weaving a flying carpet, or bake bread that sings and dances. In her image, memories of times when women were equal participants in religious life are preserved. Even Kolobok, a simple children's fairy tale, contains echoes of a solar myth. The round bread that rolls along the paths escapes from all animals, but is eventually eaten by a cunning fox, resembles ancient ideas about the sun, which completes its journey across the sky, defeats darkness, but at the end of the day still disappears beyond the horizon. Folk medicine preserved pagan ideas about the world, man, and illnesses for centuries. Healers used incantations that, in their structure, completely repeated ancient spells. On the ocean, on Boyan Island, stands a green oak. This formula, familiar to every Russian person, traces back to the idea of the world tree, the center of the universe, the source of all forces. Medicinal herbs were collected at strictly defined times, observing ritual rules inherited from pagan priests. At dawn on Ivan's Day, herbs possessed maximum power. During a full moon, some plants became poisonous, while others became medicinal. During a thunderstorm, it was forbidden to pick herbs because the power of celestial fire entered them. Incantations against illnesses were built on the ancient magical logic of likeness. As a stone sinks in water, so illness shall descend from the servant of God. As dew on islands dries up, so shall sickness leave the body. In these formulas, the Christian servant of God replaced the pagan address to the gods, but the structure of the spell itself remained unchanged. The Russian language still preserves hundreds of words associated with ancient beliefs. Spasibo, thank you, is a contraction of spasi, Bog, save, God. But before Christianity, people said, Blagodaryu, Daryu blago, I give thanks, I give good, in response to kindness. Zdravstvуй, hello, means a wish for health, but the root of this word is connected with the ancient god of health. Prosche, goodbye, is a plea to forgive all grievances before parting. Vrag, enemy, originally meant not an adversary, but a sorcerer, a person capable of vragdit, magical action. Vedma, witch, comes from Vedat, to know. She was a knowing woman, a keeper of ancient wisdom, not an evil sorceress of later conceptions. Upir and Verdalak, the names for vampires trace back to Slavic ideas about the dead who could not find peace in the afterlife. Even our modern superstitions preserve the memory of pagan gods. When we don't whistle indoors so as not to whistle away money, we remember the Domovoy, who dislikes loud noises. When we knock on wood to avoid bad luck, we appeal to the tree spirits worshipped by our ancestors. When we say tafu tafu tafu, we repeat an ancient ritual of expelling evil forces. In the 21st century, Slavic mythology is experiencing an amazing revival. Computer games populate virtual worlds with Domovoy and Leshy, giving them new life in the digital age. The Witcher, Chernobyl, World of Warcraft. In these games, ancient Slavic gods and spirits fight modern heroes, gaining new fans among young people. Horror films revive the images of Baba Yaga and Vodyanoy, but often distort their original meaning. Hollywood's Yaga becomes just an evil witch, losing her function as a guide between worlds. Russian films try to preserve authenticity but do not always succeed in conveying the depth of ancient images. Fantasy writers create entire universes based on Slavic mythology. Maria Semyonova, Nick Perumov, Elena Kayskaya. Their books introduce readers to forgotten gods, but often in modernized forms. Veles becomes a wise magician. Perun, a noble warrior, and the complex cosmology of the ancient Slavs are simplified into a scheme understandable to the modern reader. But in this popularity, there is also danger. Ancient images are often commercialized, simplified, stripped of their sacred meaning. Perun turns into a Slavic Thor. Mokosh becomes a feminist goddess, and the Domovoy a cute house spirit from children's cartoons. The true depth and complexity of Slavic mythology are lost behind bright but superficial interpretations. The study of Slavic antiquities does not stop. Archaeologists continue to find new sanctuaries, idols, ritual objects that force a reconsideration of established ideas about our ancestors' religion. In 2020, wooden idols from the 10th century, preserved in bog water, were discovered in the Smolensk region. In 2021, a unique amulet depicting Veles was found in the Novgorod region. Linguists reconstruct forgotten mythological terms, piecing together ancient texts of incantations and prayers. Each discovery adds new details to the portrait of a civilization that created one of Europe's richest mythological systems but was interrupted in its development by the adoption of Christianity. Ethnographers are rushing to record the last echoes of archaic beliefs in remote villages, where old people still remember grandmother's incantations and know how to properly appease the Domovoy. But with each passing year, these witnesses become fewer, and with them, the last threads connecting us to the ancient world disappear. What does this thousand-year-old tradition mean for us, living in an era of globalization and digital technologies? Slavic mythology is not just a museum exhibit, not an archaic superstition, but a living value system that can teach modern man a great deal. It is a worldview where man is not opposed to nature, but is a part of it, where every tree, every river, every house has its soul and requires respect, where material prosperity is inseparable from spiritual harmony, and individual success is impossible without community support. Slavic gods taught that the world is held together by a balance of opposites. Without darkness there is no light. Without winter, there is no spring. Without death, there is no birth. This wisdom is particularly relevant in our time of global crises and the search for sustainable development. The gods died in the waters of the Dnieper more than 1,000 years ago, but their spirit lives on. In every bonfire on Ivan Kupala, the reflection of Perun's sacred fire flickers. In every bliney on Maslenitsa, the gold of the ancient sun shines. In every fairy tale told to children before sleep, echoes of the wisdom our ancestors gathered for millennia can be heard. In every Russian word, the memory of the gods lives. Zdravstvuy preserves the name of the god of health. Spasibo, thank you. A prayer for protection. Proche, goodbye. A ritual of cleansing from grievances. Perhaps this is the true immortality of Slavic mythology, not in stone idols that can be destroyed, not in golden statues that can be melted down, but in the living tradition that is passed from heart to heart, from generation to generation. Slavic mythology continues to live because it answers the eternal questions of human existence. Who are we? Where did we come from? Where are we going? And what will remain after us? These questions do not lose their relevance with time, and the ancient answers to them prove surprisingly modern. The story of Perun fighting chaos resonates in the hearts of those who fight for justice in the modern world. The wisdom of Veles, who knows the price of any wealth, is understood by entrepreneurs and merchants. The care for Mokosh for women's destinies echoes the modern movement for gender equality. And as long as oaks, Perun's trees, rustle in the forests, as long as water laps in the rivers, the domain of the Vodyanoy, as long as women spin threads, Mokosh's gift, the ancient gods will live among us. Invisible, but real, forgotten by name, but alive in hearts, banished from temples, but finding new life in fairy tales, songs, traditions. Their time is not past. It lasts forever, like the echo of the first thunder, like the reflection of the first dawn, like the memory of those days when the world was young and gods walked the earth with people. And everyone who hears the rustling of the wind in the treetops, who sees in a thunderstorm not just a natural phenomenon, but a divine force, who feels in the forest silence the presence of something greater than human understanding, touches the eternal mystery of Slavic mythology. Thus concludes the story of the gods, which in reality never ends, because true gods live not in stone temples, but in human hearts, and as long as these hearts beat, as long as the blood of ancestors flows in our veins, as long as our native language rings in our ears, the ancient gods remain with us, invisible companions on our journey through time, keepers of the memory of who we were, and guides to who we can become.